Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupini avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te. Sisters and brothers in spiritual life, this confluence here today in the city of Chicago for the Maharudra, as a prelude to the Maharudra Abhishekam and Homa, is very significant. From this city, just last week, the president of this great nation, Obama, went to India and addressed the people there as sisters and brothers of India, and he explicitly mentioned that I am just echoing a traveler from India, a spiritual traveler from India, who more than 100 years back had journeyed all the way from India to this very city. And he had addressed the huge gathering before him as sisters and brothers of America. He himself was a prophet not only of the East but also the West, and he was the prophet of the meeting of the East and the West. Well, before me today I see gathered here a meeting of India and America. This is a wonderful occasion. On this occasion we shall look at the spiritual treasures which are at the core of the religion of Hinduism. Next. Yeah. You know, last week I had the opportunity to address a group of young American students at the University of North Texas in Dallas, and it was a course on South Asian religion and philosophy. And when I entered the class, I saw only American faces before me. And I said to them, I was going to be the first speaker from Hinduism to them, and to introduce Hinduism to them. And you know what a difficult task this is. I said, imagine Christianity, Islam, Judaism, the Abrahamic religions. Suppose you put them all together into one mega religion. Imagine what kind of religion that would be. One religion. And imagine now something much bigger than that. And that will begin to give you some idea of what Hinduism is. It's a vast ocean. And in that ocean of Hinduism, you have a vast ocean of scriptures. The core are the Vedas. The four Vedas form the core of Hindu scriptures. And in the Vedas, the Upanishads form the pinnacle of Hindu thought, and I might even say human thought. Thousands of years ago, the rishis who brought forth the Upanishads together are known as the Vedanta, meaning literally the end of the Vedas. Sometimes the Upanishads are found at the end of the Vedas, but basically what it means is the highest wisdom found in the Vedas are the Vedanta, they are the Upanishads. Next. Swami Vivekananda said about the Upanishads, the Upanishads are the great mine of strength. Therein lies strength enough to invigorate the whole world. Freedom, physical freedom, mental freedom, and spiritual freedom are the watchwords of the Upanishads. So he was a great preacher of the Upanishads. Many years later, in India, when he went back from the United States, he told his disciple, Sister Nivedita, I have preached only the Upanishads. He said, I have preached only the Upanishads. Next. And this is something interesting. I mentioned the great ocean of Hinduism. There was a great prince, the Mughal ruler, the Mughal prince Dara Shikoh, and he wrote a book whose in Persian, but in the literal translation would be the meeting of two great oceans. He meant Hinduism and Islam. And there what he did was he translated the Upanishads with the Bhashya commentaries into Persian. And that translation was much later taken by a young Frenchman called Anquetil Duperron. It was taken from India to the West, to France, and translated into Latin. And the great German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer, he read the Latin translation of the Persian translation of the Sanskrit original. And then he commented, that is his comment, in the whole world there is no study so beneficial and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life. It will be the solace of my death. He says there's no study as beneficial as the study of the Upanishads. And I was reading his life. It seems every day he wouldn't go to sleep at night without reading a few pages of the Upanishads. Just imagine Latin translation of a Persian translation of the Upanishads. And he did not know much about Hinduism, but just by reading that much, he was so impressed. Next. There is a verse recited by some of the Swamis in the Himalayas, which gives the name of 10 principal Upanishads. It goes like this. Isha kena katha prashna mundamandukya titirehi aitareyam cha chandogyam brihad aranyakam tatha. So these are 10 Upanishads which are usually studied in Vedanta, and there are many Upanishads. In Muktika Upanishad you find a list of 108 Upanishads. But these 10 are studied as the canon of Vedanta, the scriptural tradition of Vedanta, together with Brahma Sutra and Bhagavad Gita, mainly because Adi Shankaracharya chose these to write commentaries upon. Now the Sri Rudram, which will be used eventually in the month of June for the Abhishekam, that is also an Upanishad, Rudra Upanishad, and there's something unique about it, something very different about it compared to these traditional, the main Upanishads. I will touch upon that towards the end of this talk. Next. These Upanishads are the source of Hinduism. The philosophy of the Upanishads has been codified in the Brahma Sutras of Vyasa, and depending upon the commentary, you have different streams of Hinduism coming forth, Hindu philosophy and religion. Advaita Vedanta, depending on the commentary of Shankaracharya on the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Ramanujacharya, Sri Ramanujacharya wrote the masterpiece Sri Bhashyam, and that led to Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, the grand philosophy of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. Dvaita Vedanta, Madhvacharya's Bhashyam, the Purna Pragya Bhashyam on the Brahma Sutra, again on the Upanishads. And then Vallabhacharya, Shuddhadvaita Vedanta, Nimbakacharya, Dvaitadvaita Vedanta, Baladeva Vidyabhushanam, the philosophy of Achintya Bheda Vedanta, which is the core of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, so popular in Bengal. And you will see these are the core philosophies, and from these form the core of the various sects of Hinduism. You see, some of your Sri Vaishnavas, some of your Madhva followers of Dvaita Vedanta, and so on. There are so many sects, and they are all part of this ocean of Hinduism. And the core philosophies are these philosophies, and they are all based on the interpretation of the Upanishads. So really, the Upanishads are our shared heritage. Today we will take a quick look at the wisdom of the Upanishads and a special look at the Rudra Upanishad next. What is the essence of the Upanishads? Because you'll notice Rudra Upanishad, the essence of the Upanishad, that's the topic of my talk. So what is the essence of the Upanishads? Very simple. It can be stated in a short sentence. Swami Vivekananda was fond of repeating this again and again when he toured the United States. You are divine. All of us, as he says, we are potentially divine. To manifest this divinity is religion. God is within us. Our true nature is God. That thou art. He was literally translating from the Chandogya Upanishad, the famous Mahavakya, Tat Tvam Asi. Mahavakya literally means the great sentence. Now not literally so, because those who are Sanskrit scholars, you know Sanskrit sentences tend to run on and on. They can literally fill a page or more. Ramanujacharya's masterpiece, the commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, it begins with one sentence on the qualities of Bhagavan Vishnu. The single sentence runs to more than one full A4 page, you know. If you print it out, it will come to more than one page. But it's not a Mahavakya in that sense, not in the sense of a long sentence, but in the sense of a profound sentence. Atthato Mahan. It's in the sense of a very profound sentence. And traditionally we take 4 such Mahavakyas from 4 Vedas as representatives of each of the Vedas, and they all say the same thing. Of course, I'm giving an Advaitic interpretation for the Sanskrit scholars here. The Tattvamasi, very famous, that thou art, that meaning God, thou meaning you. You are that, the divinity. It's from the Chandogya Upanishad. This is the Mahavakya of the Sama Veda. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Brahman means the infinity, existence, consciousness, bliss. And that is the Mahavakya from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, from the Yajur Veda. Prajnanam Brahma, meaning the same thing. The consciousness that we all feel, right now we feel consciousness within. I hope you are feeling conscious. I'm not putting people to sleep here. The consciousness that you feel within right now, that is God actually, properly understood. So consciousness is Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma. From the Aitareya Upanishad, this is the Mahavakya of the Rig Veda. And the Mahavakya of the Atharva Veda, Ayam Atma Brahma. This very self within, the individual you. You are Brahman. The soul is Brahman. Next. Okay. This is what I want to touch upon. Instead of giving a general talk, let's get a taste of this. Let's really try to get a taste of this, the divinity within. In what sense are we divine? I mean, it's easy to talk about the divinity within, you are God, fine. But if you really ask somebody, are you God? Well, say, it might be anything, but I don't particularly feel God-like. So in what sense are they saying that we are divine? What sense the Upanishads say we are divine? Let's see. Let's try it. But I'll invite you to sort of metaphorically walk with me through this. It's a journey. It's a journey. The journey is to find who we really are. And the promise is that you'll find God. And there's this great Sufi poet who writes, when I searched for God, for Allah, I found myself. When I searched for myself, I found God, Allah. So this journey, journey to the realization of the self is also a journey to God. Let's see how this works. Let's take any of the Upanishad. I've taken here Taittiriya Upanishad. It's very nice. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, and there's another reason. The Taittiriya Shaka, Sri Rudram is also part of the Taittiriya Shaka. Anyway, we'll come to that later. Taittiriya Upanishad says, you want to know who you are, the Atman? Yes. Okay. What do you see yourself as? This is what I am. The first thing we say is the body. Here I am. This is what I am. All right, let's start with that. That the Upanishad calls the Annamaya Atma. It's made of food. Annamaya means that which is made of food. And the body, of course, is made of food. I entered this country through Los Angeles, and we, believe it or not, we have a center in Hollywood. In India, people ask, Swami, you're going to Hollywood? But we got that ashram, we started that ashram about the time when Hollywood was actually becoming Hollywood. So it was not actually in that sense. But I came through there, and there's an interesting incident I'd read about. It seems when the ashram was new, and the film industry too was new in 1950s and 60s, and there's a very famous actress, I forget her name. So the world famous Italian actress. She said about this Annamaya Atma, she said, somebody asked her the secret of your beauty. And she had said, all that you see here is pasta. Annam, food. The body is a modification of food. Annamaya Atma. The Upanishad says, look within. Look within. This Annamaya Atma is just like the shirt, the clothes that you're wearing outside, the jacket that you put on, that's the body. There is something more subtle within. What is within the Annamaya Atma? It says there is a Pranamaya Atma. Pranamaya Atma means life. You feel energetic, you feel sick, you feel hungry, you feel thirsty. These are functions of prana, life itself, without which the body, Annamaya Atma, is supposed to be dead. So the moment you say life, the Pranamaya is the Atma, the Annamaya becomes the Kosha. You see the word I've used. Shankaracharya says, Koshavat Achadakataya. In Sanskrit it means just like a sheath, a cover, covers something. Similarly, the self is covered by the body. Just like we are covered by the jacket you wear, you're covered by the jacket you wear, you are not the jacket. The jacket is a cover, a kosha. Just like that, the body is a kosha, a covering for the self. Pranamaya Atma, energy, health, sickness, hunger, thirst, all of that is life, breathing. Pranayama, you have heard of pranayama. So life. Is life the Atma then? Are we life itself? No, because we see the changes in the Pranamaya Kosha, the Pranamaya Atma. Sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm sick, sometimes I'm healthy, sometimes I'm hungry, sometimes I'm full. All these, I'm breathing, all this we experience. That is also like, the shirt which I wear under the jacket. Another covering for the self. Another covering for the self. And pranamaya, the sheath of life, it's called pranamaya kosha. You are not life also. You're something more subtle than the life forces flowing through the body just now. What is deeper than pranamaya? Feel within. You'll feel the mind. Thoughts, emotions, memories, feelings. We are always thinking. This mind itself, is it the self? Now see, we are coming to very subtle ground. Most grown-up people, I am sure most of you, most of us, we have a tendency to think of ourselves as minds having a body. We say my body, but I am so and so. The personality, we identify ourselves as the personality. And the Upanishad says, even that is not the self. Even that is not the Atman. The mind is something that grows and develops and changes. It changes all the time. Imagine the mind when you were, I think all of you, especially the older people here, will remember the time when they came to United States. It will be a significant day. Imagine the mind at that time. Imagine the mind now. Imagine the mind when you were 16 or 18 years old. Imagine the mind when you were 5 years old. Such a vast difference. But you are the same. Your mind has changed and evolved. Our minds change all the time. We are not the mind. So the mind also becomes a sheath. It's like the undershirt or the vest which you wear beneath the shirt. That also covers the body. So similarly, the mind also covers the self. I am not the mind. I am the witness of the mind. Now we are really on subtle ground, deeper. The Upanishad says the mind is also not the self. There's something deeper. What are you using now for understanding this, going on this journey? This journey is not a journey where you walk, It's a journey of the intellect. You're using the buddhi, the intellect. Just now, we are all using it, hopefully. The intellect which we are using, is the intellect the self? Is the intellect the self? For very much the same reasons that it changes. Imagine the intellect years ago. Imagine the intellect now. The intellect changes. And so intellect also, the Upanishad says, is not the self. The intellect also is a covering of the self. The Vijnanamaya Kosha, the sheath of the intellect. Something deeper than the intellect. Something deeper than the intellect. Now, what could be deeper than the intellect? What lies beyond the mind? How do we know? The Upanishad says there is one experience which you have. When you exist, you are, we exist, but we don't feel the body, we don't feel the mind, we don't even feel the intellect, and yet we exist. And what is that? When we go in, exactly. When you go into deep sleep, sushupti. When you go into deep sleep. You say deep sleep, are we there or not there? We are there. After all, whose sleep was it if we did not sleep? If you go into deep sleep and you cannot come out and say, I was not there, but there was sleep, there was no sleeper. No. So, after waking up, we say, I was awake, I fell asleep and dreamt, and then I stopped dreaming. There was a time when we were absolutely blank, and now I'm awake again. So that means that blankness also was experienced by something. That's the argument. There's a long chain of arguments about this, but I'm summarizing. Because we wake up and say, I slept, I did not know anything. Nakinchida vedesham, sukham aham asapsama, nakinchida vedesham. I slept happily, like a log, you say in America. I slept like a log. I didn't know anything. But that's also an experience. Experience of things is an experience. Experience of blankness is also an experience. What was experiencing there? The blankness that you experience there, that is the final covering, the final sheath, beyond which lies, don't say myself or my Atman, you. Your own nature, our true nature, lies beyond that darkness which you experience in deep sleep. The darkness is called Anandamaya Kosha. Anandamaya Kosha, the bliss, the sheath of bliss. That's also like clothes we put on the body. So it's something that covers the real self. Why is it called the sheath of bliss? And I like to think, we say ignorance is bliss. So in deep sleep we are completely ignorant. So in that sense maybe it's called the sheath of bliss, the covering of bliss. It's darkness, it's blankness. It's also absolute rest. It's also absolute rest. Now, The Upanishad takes you, if you read the Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahmanandavalli, it takes you step by step by step. Now we have come to a very deep part of ourselves, darkness of deep sleep. And now what would you expect? And here the Upanishad is very mischievous. What would you expect? Next, they will tell us about the Atman. Something like you are consciousness, you are bliss, or Satchidananda, you are God, something like that they will tell us. But the very interesting thing is, at this point, having spoken about the Anandamaya Kosha, the Upanishad keeps quiet. You would expect, okay, now tell me, beyond the Anandamaya Kosha, I am. Something like Shankaracharya. See, that's gone into deep sleep now. Anandamaya Kosha. Okay, he's back again. So, something like Shankaracharya, Chidananda Rupa Shivoham, something like that, we expect the Upanishad to say. Upanishad does not do that. It keeps quiet. The natural reaction will be of the student, so are you saying that there are these coverings and there is no such thing as the self? Natural reaction will be that maybe there's nothing. It's just like an onion which you keep peeling, and finally, what is the core of the onion? There's no core. You keep peeling and everything comes off. So 5 sheets and there's no self. Asad Brahma iti veda ched asanneva sabhavati. The Upanishad says, suppose I say, the student says, there is no self, no Brahman, no self. The Upanishad says, if there is no self, then you don't exist. But do you ever feel that you don't exist? Now, what is the mystery? Is there no Atman then? What is the mystery? Why does the Upanishad keep silent? Here is a remarkable teaching technique, a pedagogic technique. If you follow this, it's a bit scary also, but if you take one thing away from this talk, it is at this point. Let's do this next. And don't be scared, we'll go through it carefully. Here, I'll tell you a little story. 10 men were crossing a river. A famous old story. And in fact, Vidyaranya Swami in his Panchadashi, in trying to explain why the Upanishad keeps silence, he tells this story. 10 men were crossing a river. And when they crossed the river, it was pretty deep, and it occurred to some of them that, did we all cross or did anybody drown? So one of them said, let me count. Stand in a queue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, that can't be right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh my God. The other person said, you're not doing it right. Let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh my God, where's the 10th person? And they started crying. Oh, the 10th person, our poor friend, he drowned while crossing the river. They sat down and started crying. In India, they'll do like this. They say ha-ha-kar karte. Now, ha-ha-kar in Sanskrit is just the opposite of the English ha-ha. It's not laughing, it means alas. Yeah? Now this person was walking by and he saw this group of people sitting and crying. And he asked him, what's wrong? Oh, we were crossing and our friend, the 10th person, he drowned. And this person quickly counted and he saw there were 10 people. And then he said, did you count? He said, we counted. How did you count? Well, we are telling you there is no 10th person. He's drowned, he's dead. Our poor friend is dead. Why? What's the point of these pointless questions? Now, that person says, calm down. Believe me, the 10th person is. Guru, you see, comes and says, God exists. I don't see it. Wait. Relax. The 10th person is. Calm down. Okay. I'll show you the 10th person. Okay. Count. Well, I've counted. No, count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that man came and took hold of this person's hand and Dashamastvamasi, you are the 10th. And this person, for a moment he was bewildered and he said, oh my God, I am the 10th. Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the other person came, let me try it, 10. And the 10th person has been found and they are very happy and thanked the person. Now, what's the point of the story? Now we're going to apply it. Okay. You remember the 5 sheets? Body. We call it the physical body. You feel it. The Upanishad says, go deeper. Feel the breath within. The pranamaya kosha. Okay, I feel it. Close your eyes and feel the mind within. Thoughts, perceptions. They're coming in the mind. Emotions, memories. Okay, I feel that too. Go deeper. The intellect. The ego. I am Mr. or Mrs. or Miss so and so. I understand 2 plus 2 is 4. This is the ego. This is the intellect. Vijnanamaya kosha. I understand. Go deeper. Beyond that you will find blankness. Just now if you see, beyond the buddhi, it's nothing, blankness. That blankness is the Anandamaya kosha. Now, what we are doing, the mistake which we commit is Annamaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, Manomaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, Anandamaya kosha, and some Atman. One more we are trying to look for. Never find it. The 10th person is not there. There you have to intuitively grasp the one who watches these 5 koshas. You can't look for one more Atman beyond the Anandamaya kosha. You'll never find it. You are the one who is watching, experiencing. That one which is watching and experiencing these 5, you have to take that turn there. How do you take that turn, Swamiji? It can't be put into words. It is instinctive. It is intuitive. If you do that, as the MC said at the beginning, Jivan Mukta. Nischala Tattve, Jivan Mukti. So that Nischala Tattva is within us, the unchanging reality. That is watching these 5 koshas. That is experiencing these 5 koshas, identifying itself with the 5 koshas and saying, I am so and so, this limited person. But actually it is free of these 5 koshas. The body may change, grow older and die. You exist. Breathing, it's a very good thing to breathe, necessary. But one day it will stop. You exist. Mind, whether it's thinking, dreaming or stopped in deep sleep, you exist. Same for the buddhi. Beyond the darkness of deep sleep, one of our Swamis, he wrote a poem in Malayalam. I wish I could read Malayalam. Beautiful, evocative title, The Midnight Sun. The midnight sun. You can understand? In the darkness of deep sleep, if there is a sun, a consciousness. So, that is a taste of the Atman, that which watches the 5 sheets. If you try it, sometimes there are unexpected side effects. Some people have said, Swami, it makes me feel scared at that last moment. Swami, it makes me feel sick. I feel giddy if I try that turn. But that is the teaching of the Upanishad. You are the 10th. Here literally does not mean the 10th. The one which watches the 5 sheets, you are that next. So that is one teaching, the divinity within us. Tattvamasi, it means you are God. That consciousness which watches the 5 koshas within each of us is one consciousness, is one Atman. You may ask the question, how many Atmas are there? There are several hundred people here. So several hundred bodies, so many Pranamaya koshas, so many Manomaya koshas and so on. How many Atmas are there? Many or one? And Arjuna had this question. In 13th chapter of the Gita, Sri Krishna answers dramatically. He says, Kshetragyam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. O Arjuna, in all these bodies, panchakoshas, all of us as panchakoshas, beyond this 5 koshas, the consciousness which experiences everything, it is one consciousness, and I meaning God, not just Krishna, but God. Krishna is God. God is that consciousness. So it is an immanent divinity within all of us, which shines forth, limited to body and mind, are what we are. In our true nature, God. So this is a somewhat Advaitic interpretation, but there are different interpretations possible. The second great thing to learn, with which we'll come to the climax of this talk this evening, is Swami Vivekananda puts it. Another great teaching of the Upanishads is the oneness of existence. Swami Vivekananda says, the Upanishads have this one theme before them. What is it that, by knowing which we know everything else? This is literally a translation from the Mundaka Upanishad, where the student Shaunaka goes to the teacher Angiras and asks, Kasminnu bhagavo vijñāte sarvamidam vijñātam bhavati iti. Knowing what do we know everything? Knowing what do we know everything? And how is that possible? Even in Chandogya Upanishad, Shvetaketu's father says, at school, in your college, did they teach you that by knowing which everything is known? And now Shvetaketu was very proud of having got a degree from college. I think he'd just come back from Harvard or something, Cornell. He was very proud of himself. So his father deflated him by asking this question. In your university, did they teach you that, by knowing which everything is known? Now, the commentator Shankaracharya is humorous there. Shvetaketu said, no, perhaps my professors didn't know. You tell me. And Shankaracharya says he was scared of being sent back to school again. So he said, I'll stay at home, you tell me, what is that by knowing which everything is known? Now, that is what the Upanishad tries to tell us. There is something. But how can you know everything by knowing one thing? Let me give you an example. Next. Chandogya Upanishad talks of gold and ornaments. Suppose you have a necklace, a bangle, earrings, and they're all made of gold. If I ask you how many are there, you'll say pair of earrings, a necklace, and a bangle. There are three things. If I said, look upon it as gold, okay? How many things are there? One. Why not three? Because those three do not exist apart from the gold. They're gold only. They're forms of gold. Now, from the point of view of the substance, from the point of view of the material cause, technically called the karanam, all the effects, multiplicity of effects, become one. If all these chairs are made of wood, if you count the chairs, 500. If you count the substance, the wood, 1. These chairs, these 500 chairs are not 2 compared to wood. Look at the word language I'm using. There's no second thing apart from wood in 500 wooden chairs. No second thing literally translates into na dvaitam, advaitam. So there is no second apart from the reality which is taught in the Upanishads. That the Upanishads proclaim there is such a reality. I mean, I'm not saying wood is that reality. That will be a very wooden-headed Advaita. So there is such a reality where, if you look at it from that point, nothing else exists. All this multiplicity is a manifestation, nama rupa, of that reality. So from the point of that reality, all of this is Advaitam, non-dual, non-separate. So that one existence is called Brahman in the Upanishads, or in Chandogya Upanishads called Sat, pure existence. Compared to pure existence, all this is just a manifestation of pure existence. The Isha Upanishad, another Upanishad, the first line, many people know this. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat. Mahatma Gandhi, it seems, he said, if all the scriptures of the Hindus disappear, just this one, the first beginning sentence of the first mantra of the Isha Upanishad exists, all of Hinduism will exist. See God in everything, or literally cover everything with God. God exists everywhere. And one reality, which in Sikhism is called Ek Onkar, that one existence is everywhere, and that manifests in these forms. And see God everywhere means cover everything with God, the actual language, and Shankaracharya, he changes that into, he interprets that as cover everything with God means discover God in everything. Uncover God in everything. Isha vasyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat. Whatever is in this world, moving and unmoving, you find God in everything. Next. Sri Ramakrishna once in his ecstasy, he said, not compassion to living beings, but worship of God in them by service. Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva. Oh, this is very nice and coincidental. We are talking about Rudra Upanishad and Shiva. Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva. To find Shiva, to know that Shiva exists in all beings and worship Shiva in that way. And Swami Vivekananda, who was a college boy at that time, when he heard this from Sri Ramakrishna, he said, today I have learned something remarkable. And if God gives me the opportunity, I shall spread this all over the world. And when he started the Ramakrishna Mission, hospitals, schools, colleges, relief activities, and that was all the manifestation of this philosophical insight. Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva. You're not doing charity. You're not doing social service. The Shiva you worship in the temple is the Shiva you are worshipping in the person in distress. The poor person, you worship that Shiva with financial aid. The ignorant person, you worship that Shiva with education. The sick person, you worship that Shiva with medicine and treatment. Actually, in our hospital in Banaras, where Vishwanath Shiva is there, patients are treated, and symbolically one day, of course they are treated every day with medicines and medical care, one day they are actually worshipped with flowers and garlands and agarbatti and all, the monks will go around, because it's not make-believe. It's the insight that God is manifesting through these panchakoshas. It is Shiva alone whom we are worshipping through medical care as a patient. It's an opportunity. God comes in so many forms to accept our worship. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to spiritualize our whole life. Why only in the meditation room? Why only in the temple? Whole of life can be spiritualized. Swami Ranganathanandaji of revered memory, who was president of the Ramakrishna Mission several years back, he used to say, what is spirituality? When I close my eyes, I find peace within. When I open my eyes, my attitude is, what can I do for you? That is spirituality. You see, this is just the reverse of our worldly attitude. I close my eyes, oh Swamiji, so much disturbance. When I open my eyes, what can I get from you? Not what I can give. So, that's okay. So, Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva is, inside you find God. Outside you find God and worship God in whatever way God is asking or giving you the opportunity for worship. Swami Vivekananda said, let the giver kneel down and offer. Let the receiver stand up and receive. This is worship. This is not charity. Next. Let's come to Sri Rudram and the time left for us. It's very unique actually. The Sri Rudram, where is it located in the Vedas? It's in Yajur Veda in the Taittiriya Shaka in the fourth book, 5th and 7th chapters. 5th and 7th chapters, and it's variously known as the Rudra Prashna, the Shatarudriya, the Rudra Adhyaya, also as Rudra Upanishad. Rudra Upanishad, it's an Upanishad. Next. It has two parts. You will often, as time comes closer, you will hear these terms, Namakam and Chamakam. What does it mean? Namakam doesn't mean salt. There are 183 Namaha in the 5th chapter, and that section is therefore known as the Namakam. And there are some 358 times the Chame repeated. Cha means and, to me. So Chame, it is repeated 358 times in the 7th chapter, and inevitably it's called the Chamakam. So these are the two chapters which comprise the Rudra Upanishad, and it will be used in the sacrifice, in the homam. Next. Now, it's an interesting thing. A great Mahamohopadhyaya once told me this. He said, the whole of the Veda, if you know, it is divided into 3 parts, roughly. A good part of it is to do with rituals, yajna, or they are technically known as karma, Vaidika karma. Another part deals with upasana, worship, upasana. And the third part are the Upanishads, which deal with knowledge, self-knowledge, who am I? And self-knowledge which leads to mukti. Now, these are 3 parts. But this Mahamohopadhyaya told me something interesting. He said the tradition is every mantra of the Veda, the entire Veda, every mantra of the Veda can be interpreted in 3 ways. As part of a ritual, as part of a worship of God, and as a teaching, a spiritual teaching, Upanishad for self-realization. So every mantra, not just the Upanishads. So he says, Yajna Paksha Vyakhya, as Yajna. So every mantra can be interpreted as ritual. Devata Paksha Vyakhya, as worship of God. And Atma Paksha, that means as knowledge about the self, Panchakosha, and then you know what is the self beyond. Now, practically it's difficult to do. If you look at the mantras of the Vedas, some of them very obviously deal with yajna, with ritual. Some of them very obviously deal with worship of God. Some of them are very obviously Upanishads, the 10 Upanishads which I mentioned, Isha, Kena and all that. They are Upanishads, they are spiritual teachings, wisdom teachings. Now, this Sri Rudram, interestingly, all 3 are found in this one section of the Vedas. It is ritual, karma. It is worship of Shiva, upasana. It is also jnana, which tells you your reality is Shiva. When Shankaracharya says, Chidananda Rupa Shivaham. So our inner reality is Shiva. The God we worship is Shiva. And the oblation we pour to in the Homa Kunda and through our daily activities. Through our daily activities is Shiva. You see, the Homa when you do, there'll be the priest who pours the offering, oblation, with the help of the spoon, arpanam, into the fire. And this is yajna. Now Vedanta tells us convert your whole life into yajna. Brahmarpanam brahmahavi brahmagno brahmanautam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. You see, the spoon with which you pour ghee, that is Brahman, Satchidananda. The ghee which you are pouring into the fire is Satchidananda, Brahmahavi. The fire which is blazing in front of you, that is Brahman. The one who is pouring, the priest, Brahman. The act of pouring, action, Brahman. One who sees God in all actions realizes God. Brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. And that's not just the yajna, that's a symbol which will inform and inspire our daily lives so that we can convert our daily life into spiritual life. Swami Vivekananda says, he who curses the world, runs away from the world to meditate and die in a Himalayan cave, he has missed the way. He who plunges headlong into the luxuries and foolishness of the world, he too has missed the way. Now, this is very strange. If you run away from the world, you have missed the way. If you embrace the world, you have missed the way. Then what is the way? He says the way is to defy life. The life which you have, find God there. See God in everything. That is the way. So if you run away from the world, that means you are leaving God aside and trying to find God somewhere else. It's like the gold ornament, the earring, the necklace, and the bangle. And you see somebody says the reality is gold. And if somebody is so foolish enough to say, oh, the reality is gold, let me throw away the ornaments and search for gold. Never find gold. It's right there. So you have to find, not gold, you have to find God. We have to find God in our daily activities, in the people with whom we spend our life, at home and in your career, and in the larger community. It is impersonal. There is no division of religion, not just limited to Hindus. It can be Hindu, Muslim, Christians, Jews, Sikhs, anybody, or atheists, everybody. God exists everywhere, equally. No division of man or woman, no division of caste or age. God exists equally. Why only human beings? In all beings, God exists. Even in non-living things, the same God shines forth. So Sri Rudram, it gives us ritual, worship, and self-realization. Next. I was reading this book on Sri Rudram. There's no time here. Exhaustive evidence from Shruti, from Smriti, from Itihasa and Purana. They proclaim that Sri Rudram is the most important text in the whole Veda. It's amazing. If you see the book, you'd see that Swami who has written this, Swami Amritanandaji, who is now in Belur Math, is a well-known Vedic scholar. He has gathered so much information on Sri Rudram and put it in that book. And it says, in the point of all these Shruti, Smriti, Itihasa and all, they say, those who want bhoga, we want artha and kama in this life, for them Sri Rudram chanting and the practice is very efficacious. It gives results. Those who want prayashchitta, if we want to repent for our sins, the practice of this Sri Rudram is very purifying. And those who want moksha, God realization, self-realization, for them also Sri Rudram is prescribed. Next. So benefits of Sri Rudram, what we want in life, dharmartha kama moksha. We say all four things which human beings could possibly want. Kama, pleasures. Artha, success, power, wealth in life. Dharma, the bounds of morality and decency, and the punya, which our forefathers believed that takes us to heaven in the next life. All of these are called dharmartha kama. If you want them and you approach Sri Rudram with this, you will get this. If you don't want any of it, and you want God only, you approach the Sri Rudram with that attitude, it's called a nishkama bhava. You become fit for Vedanta jnana. Adhikaritva of Vedanta is attained by doing karma and upasana without desire. So Gita, for example, when Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, do your duty, not to take revenge on the Kauravas, not for the kingdom, but you still fight this war so that you become fit for Vedanta jnana. So Sri Rudram confers that, makes us fit for moksha. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha, all are the benefits of Sri Rudram. Next. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Thank you. I pray to Sri Bhagavan that this confluence of India and America which has come together in Chicago, may the blessings of Bhagavan Shiva, the Lord, be on all of us, on all of us. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Another round of applause, please. One more time. Thank you. Srimati Vijaya Sharma and Sri Subramaniam Sundaram would like to give a token.
Thank you, Swamiji. Swami Sarvapriyananda has to travel to a different city tonight, so he's not going to stay for the whole rest of the program. But I just want to thank Swami Sarvapriyananda ji. No words could completely express the sense of gratitude we feel. I am reminded of William Blake's words, "To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." You have taken a very difficult topic, Swami Sarvapriyananda ji. You have taken the most profound of all topics, the oldest of all topics, and you have, in a little under 1 hour, you have given us a wisdom and an insight into it that, and your frozen time and your frozen space. Thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts.